Hello and welcome to the Village Halls podcast, sponsored by Allied Westminster, the UK's largest specialist provider of village hall insurance and the home of Village Guard. Now, we all know that being involved in the running of a village church or community hall can be incredibly rewarding and fulfilling. But at the same time, it's not without its challenges, and community buildings are just like any other, subject to very important regulations around things like employment, health and safety, data protection, disability, and so on. These regulations and their related good practices exist for very good reasons, and perhaps there are none more important than those that seek to protect children. However, this can also seem complicated and a little overwhelming at times. In fact, we were recently contacted by a trustee of a village hall who asked us about DBS checks around third parties using the hall and so on. And so rather than try and answer those sort of questions ourselves, we thought we'd invite an expert onto the show to take us through some of the key points. So I'm delighted to welcome as our guest today, Shirley Maginley, who is a senior consultant at the UK's leading children's charity, NSPCC. Hi, Shirley. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, hello, Johnny. It's really great to be with you today. Particularly as NSPCC, 90% of our charity actually comes from voluntary donations. So much of that money has been raised by wonderful fundraisers who use your listeners' venues for their countless events, like, plant sales or dinner dances or coffee mornings, for example. So it's really wonderful to be here with you.
Oh, that's wonderful, Shirley, and great. That's great to know that that you're receiving a lot of support from all of the communities out there as well with your important work. Let's begin with you letting me know a little bit about your role at the NSPCC, Shirley, and how you help those who run or use village halls yourself.
Yeah, well, as you said in an intro, I'm a senior consultant working for the NSPCC, and I mainly work with faith-based organizations and minority ethnic communities, but people who do a lot of work within the communities and provide services. So what I try to do is to support them in their safeguarding work with children and young people. And this means to ensure that they have the knowledge and the skills and the confidence to be able to provide a safe space for children and young people. And this may entail helping them to develop policies and procedures, or providing training, or even developing resources to meet specific needs. So at the NSBC, we really want to ensure that everyone who works with children or engages with them are aware of their responsibilities to keep children safe.
Now, I guess for all kinds of reasons, not least some of the high-profile media stories around abuse and so on in recent years, there's been several changes, hasn't there, around work to safeguard children from harm over the past few years, hasn't there?
Oh, yes, there has. And anyone who, reads the newspaper, looks at television, will be aware of the concerns that we have nowadays. And you could say, thank God for these medium which bring things to life. But yes, the world has changed, and the way we look at protection of children has also been heightened, and I think become more knowledgeable and more responsible in recent years. Let's face it, children nowadays live in a different world from you and I don't know how old you are,
Yeah.
Johnny, but certainly a different world from what I grew up in. And so that means they are more knowledgeable about the world around them and some of the harms and things that can happen, but they're also exposed to greater risks thanks to technology, for instance. And there's a lot of focus in recent years on being safe online, because for a young person, there's no distinction between an offline world and an online world. It's just their world. But with these wonderful devices like mobile phones and computers and tablets, also comes with some risk, because there will be people who will be looking to contact and engage with children to do harm.
Yeah, and what about the pandemic as well? How have you seen that impacting on things?
Well, the pandemic has changed everyone's world, and definitely children and young people. We know from what has been raised in public, and even through our NSPCC helpline and childline services, that the risk for to children in terms of harm and abuse has increased. Due to the lockdown and keeping indoors. We've received a lot of calls from children and young people to our childline services, which NSPCC runs. We've received a lot of calls from adults because they have been concerned around children, again, being in homes, being locked down, and been more exposed to abusive behaviors. So we've been at the NSPC really, really busy in the last year trying to support and give advice and guidance to children and young people across the board.
Fantastic. Now, as I mentioned in my intro, people are often confused, aren't they, about things like DBS checks. And so what processes should people be following, for example, to get things like this done?
Well, DBS check, let's break that down. That's Disclosure and Barring Service. And it's an
Yeah.
acronym we use all the time. Really, it's a criminal records check with the addition of a barring list. So, by law, statutory guidance, anyone who works with children and young people are required to have safeguarding arrangements in place. And DBS checks are part of what we call safer recruitment practice, which is a set of practice to help make sure that your volunteers are suitable to be working with children. So the DBS check really, sometimes it can be a bit complicated to understand, but there's lots of information to help people work that through. So anyone who does any work with children and young people, let's say 3 days within a 30-day period, can be eligible for a check. Some people go ahead and do it anyway because it's a good practice. And sometimes even parents ask, have you been DBS checked? Because they want to know. So checks are available for anyone who works with children and young people. And if you have particular activities involving teaching and training or instructing children, you could also have a criminal records check and be eligible to see against the barred list. That means a list that government holds, a list of people who are really not suitable to be working with children. So your name will be run against that list. So while it sounds complicated, it's DBS. There's lots of information out there to help you to see, if you're eligible and what level check you will need for your work. In fact, there's a tool. There's a tool online that can help you. Just give you a list of questions, and you can go through, and they could give you an assessment of what level check that you will need.
Okay, so I mean, let me give you a quick example. If there's an adult who was, let's say, visiting or using the village hall to run a children's activity for a few hours every now and then, do they need to have a DBS check?
I would say absolutely. If your role involves working with children and young people, then most certainly you will be eligible for a DBS check, and it's good practice. It's relatively cheap, about £23 really. But anyone could apply for a basic level check, and it will only reveal a certain amount of information. But if your role requires a higher level check, you will need to make sure that you check this out to make sure you got the proper level check that you need. And it'll be your responsibility to ensure that you have this level check. So absolutely, most likely if someone comes to a village hall and they're running an activity for children, it probably wouldn't be the first time. It's probably something they do maybe frequently or from every now and then, but they will have experience in it. And it's always a good idea to make sure that they know what their responsibilities are, to have these checks, to know what safe practice entails, to ensure that they work safely with children, and to know as well if any concerns that they become aware of or told, that they know who to speak to, just to have a chat about it and to refer it upwards.
Because of course, I mean, this is everyone's nightmare situation, isn't it? But what should you do if you discover that someone who could pose a risk is actually working with children?
Yes, and sometimes, we don't, I should say most of people who work with children, the far majority, want to do their best to ensure that children are safe and they're responsible. But we do know that there are individuals who will seek out ways to harm children in some sort of way. So if anyone becomes, aware of an individual who they think may have harmed a child or behaved in a way that may not be suitable for them to be working with children, they should certainly raise that, that concern. Hopefully, village halls will have policies, safeguarding policies and procedures in place, and a named person to go to discuss these concerns. And anyone using, any group using a village hall should be aware of this. They should be aware of what the safeguarding policy is for that village hall or community hall. So if you do have concerns about anyone in it, again, you don't have to have all the facts because it would not be possible sometimes to have that. But if you have a nagging concern or just something that doesn't sit quietly with you, please do share your concern with someone who can take it forward. This will be someone who is aware of what safeguarding is and know what the right protocols are to take it forward. And anyone could call the NSPCC helpline to refer a concern or just to seek advice, really. And I'll give you that number at the end of our conversation. Or certainly within the local area, there'll be a local authority children's services, which they can also call just to discuss this concern. It doesn't mean you're reporting anyone. It's just to say, I have a concern, but I'm not sure it's a concern. Can I just tell you about it? And that professional will be able to advise in a better way.
Yeah, you mentioned there as well that the various ways that this, albeit very small minority of people, might seek to harm children. What are the kind of risks that exist for children, especially those who participate in typical activities in and around community buildings, Shirley?
Mm. Well, children nowadays, children period, are exposed to all types of risk, Johnny. It could be anything from dealing with health and safety issues, or it could be risk of abuse and harms from adults or even other children. Sexual abuse, of course, has caught the media headlights so many times, but there are other types of abuse as well. For instance, physical abuse. Emotional abuse. A child could be called names or belittled. Could be discriminated against. Of course, the online abuse is there as well because children do have their devices they use, and the bullying behavior can continue even after they leave that village hall. So there's a whole host of types of risks that children can be exposed to. It'll be difficult to identify all the risks because there's so many different kinds of risk, but it's really on the onus of the adults around children to be aware of what issues and concerns might look like. So when they spot something, they will be able to follow it up and not ignore it. It's so important that if you are aware of any types of harms or even the risk of harm, that you don't ignore it, that you be able to, share that concern with someone who can help. But our responsibility as adults is really to ensure a safe space for children in any hall or venue that they use.
Yeah, and you mentioned there that the things can carry on away from the hall and so on. And I think that's where some people have a little bit of difficulty as well in understanding what their actual responsibilities are when they manage or administer a village hall. So is there any way you can clarify that with regard to, what they have to do, if you like, when it comes to providing a safe place for children?
Absolutely. One mantra we have in the child protection world, especially when we do training, we say safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. You don't have
Yeah.
to wear the hat as a manager or a designated safeguarding lead, but it's everyone's responsibility to keep our children safe. It takes a whole village to raise a child, per se. So we know during the lockdown, for instance, children were exposed to higher levels of abuse at home. And now that they are back to school, these harms can be exposed, in schools or in village halls or other types of activities. So the adults around them, if they notice a change in the child's behavior, to say, that's something different, there's something not quite right, maybe have a conversation with the child just to check it out. I'm not saying they have to become the experts on spotting abuse, but really as adults, if you are aware of something or you just feel something isn't right with that child, you go and just check it out or share your concern with others. We also, say to people who run activities and venues that they should have proper training available so they will be able to know what
Yeah.
a concern is a concern. And that's a big question people always ask, how do I know if my concern is a real one? Or, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Well, you don't really have to worry about that so much in sharing a concern, because if you do share a concern, the person who takes that information with you, if they are trained, should be able to know how to take that and share it appropriately. Yes, and they will have the
Yeah.
training to know when to do that in a relatively safe and expedient way. So don't ignore concerns, share it with someone, and if you do have a role in children's work, by all means, please, do get some training. There's lots of training available. The NSPCC certainly provides training. We even have e-learning courses now, which you can access 24 hours a day at your own, flexibility, and it's relatively inexpensive. But so there's lots of opportunities there to be knowledgeable around the risk to children, what abuse is, what harm is, and how to spot it. And most importantly, Johnny, how to respond appropriately when a child shares a concern with you or even another adult, because that is a real trigger point.
Brilliant. So you mentioned training there, which is kind of one part of that. I guess NSPCC must also offer things like guidance, which you can access online. You mentioned a phone number there before as well. So give me a brief breakdown of the resources that people can tap into through you.
Well, we have, oh my goodness, our resources is so wide spanned, but absolutely we
Yeah.
have lots of resources to help voluntary groups to get their policies and procedures in place. And it's free and it's accessible from our NSPCC helpline, which is you just have to Google nspcc.org.uk and put community groups or community settings, and you'll find a range of resources there to help you put those policies and procedures in place. But if that is a bit too difficult, and sometimes it can be really complicated for some groups, there's also hands-on help, from my team, which is our consultancy team, that can work with organizations and groups to even develop it with them, those policies and procedures. So those kinds of help is available. We also have a whole range of other information on different types of harm that children might be experiencing. We have information for parents and how to understand and to, be able to better to support their children through a whole range of issues and concerns. I mentioned already our NSPCC helpline, which is available for adults to phone just to ask a question or to raise a concern with us, and that's available. And I'll give the number at the end. We also have our Childline services, which is available for children and young people to speak in a free and confidential space with a counselor. And this has been really used, particularly in the last year during this pandemic. The number of counseling sessions we've had has really increased. And we were so pleased to be able to still be there for children even during the lockdown, because let's face it, some of these children didn't have anyone to turn to, and they were basically just locked in their houses, sometimes with abusers. So it's important that we gave,
Yeah.
access to this sort of support. So the NSPCC, we are the largest, as you said, the largest children's charity in the UK, working to keep children safe. And there's lots of information available from our website. We have website for professionals and managers, people who run village halls and other community groups. And the information is all there to keep you updated, even with legislation and best practice. There's such a whole range of information there that you can just check out.
Excellent. Well, as we always do with all of the episodes that we put out, we'll put some links on our
Oh,
website
great.
as well, Shirley, to make sure that there's various things that people can tap into straight away. And I guess the key thing, and I mean, the real kind of simple message here, isn't it, is that you never close your eyes to this issue. That's when things can really go badly wrong. So if you feel something isn't right, do something about it.
That's right. That's right. Just do something about it. Exactly. And that way, more children will be saved from harm and abuse, because nobody wants to see children hurt.
Okay. And I think we've reached that point where you can give that helpline number as well, Shirley.
Okay. So the NSPC helpline number is 0800 08 800 5000. Okay, I'm going to say that again. 0808
Yeah.
800 5000. Okay, 800 5000. And we also can be reached by our email, which is quite simple as well. It's help@nspcc.org.uk. That's help@nspcc.org.uk. And I will also give out the Childline number as well, which is really simple. It's 0800 1111. That's 0800 1111. And there's also lots of information on our Childline website. Just Google childline.org.uk and you'll find it there.
That's brilliant, Shirley. Fantastic. Well, thanks very much. Not just for coming on today and explaining so much about safeguarding and so on, but also for all of the incredible work that you and the NSPCC do in protecting children from harm and supporting community and other organisations with all of that. It's brilliant.
Oh, and thank you. And thank you very much for our listeners who continue to support our work and continue to support children in their community.
Yeah. No, thanks very much, Shirley. And well, that's all for this episode. Don't forget about our wonderful Villagers photo competition, which we launched a few weeks ago and could result in you winning £1,000 for your village hall and £500 for yourself. You can find a special episode and page about this on our website. Other than that, thanks as always to our headline sponsor and specialist insurance provider, Allied Westminster, for making our podcast possible, and whose services you can discover more about at villageguard.com, and also online booking system provider Hallmaster, who are offering a £10 discount for our listeners for any orders placed at hallmaster.co.uk until the end of June. You can find a discount code on the sponsors page of our website. You've been listening to the Village Halls podcast, a unique listening community for Britain's village, church and community halls, and anyone interested in the vital community services they provide. We'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with another episode, so if you haven't already, please visit thevillagehallspodcast.com to subscribe, sign up for updates, link through to our social media pages and to find out more. Until the next time, goodbye for now.